What's up, bosses? Welcome to About Her Business, the podcast where we leave all the gossip at the door and get straight down to business. I'm your host, Jonte, and today we have feminist business coach, Miss Becky Mollenkamp. Now, Ms. Mollenkamp helps entrepreneurs build human-first businesses that honors flourishing over profit. She's also an author of an amazing book and a podcaster, and she's coming to help us thrive today on what she means business. So, ladies, grab those cups and those notepads, and let's get down to it. The meeting is now in session. Welcome, Ms. Mollenkamp.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Are you ready to get started?
I am.
So let's go. Can you share what initially drew you to the work of coaching service-based entrepreneurs and how your own journey shaped that path?
Yeah, it goes back quite a bit. I was a good girl, quote unquote. I did all the right things that I thought I was supposed to do and got married and had a job that looked really good on paper and had lots of money and everything looked really good to everyone else. And I was secretly really unhappy and couldn't say why. And that was a really hard place to be, not being able to articulate why you're not happy, but just knowing that this life that looks so good wasn't really doing it for me. And then in 2010, my brother died of a heroin overdose when he was 30. And that really shifted everything because it was the wake-up call that I needed to really understand life is too short to be doing all the quote unquote right things and being unhappy. And so that's when I decided I needed to make some big changes in my life, which ultimately led to me getting a divorce, me moving back home with my mom in my 30s, which was, tough. A lot of us have done it and it's hard sometimes to do that, but it gave me the space to really figure out what I wanted to do with my life and to grieve also because I needed time for that. And ultimately that made me start to realize I wanted to help other women specifically not have to have a huge life-shattering moment be the thing that made them realize that they can actually live a life they want to live. Like we're allowed to do things that we want to do because they feel good and not just because we've been told we should. And so that was really back in 2010 was the thing that sort of changed everything. Before that, I was a journalist and then I shifted towards coaching and helping other women. And because I had built a successful freelance journalism business, I sort of knew business. And that was where I ended up putting those efforts. And also I think that entrepreneurship offers women a really great path to being able to build a life they want, on their own outside of all the systems. And so those things are kind of what combined towards me becoming a business coach.
And I want to first send my condolences on the loss of your brother and talk about turning pain into purpose, because when we go through those life-changing moments, it helps us reflect and start to say what's more important in our lives. And a lot of times it leads us into community and helping others. So again, Ms. Mollenkamp, thank you for opening up with our audience on that one. I truly appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks.
Now, what experiences or influences led you to center your approach around human first businesses rather than the traditional profit focused models?
I used to work in corporate America. I was very briefly because it didn't fit for me, as it doesn't for a lot of people. But I worked for a company at a unique time where when I started there, it was privately owned. It was a large company with thousands of employees, but it was still a privately family owned business. And I watched over the first couple of years of me being there, the change that happened when they went public and went on to the stock exchange and the difference that that makes, because it goes from a company that was 100 years old, that cared deeply about its employees, that really every decision it was making was about, both the legacy of what they produced, but also the people that helped to make the company what it was. It shifted from that, where that was at the heart of every decision, to the only thing that mattered was how do we make our stockholders more money this quarter? And every quarter you have to make more money. There's never an end game of like, here's our goal, we've done it, everyone. Once a company is on the public stock exchange, the stockholders expect more returns every quarter. And so you have to be able to show how you're going to make more money. Well, how do you do that? And typically that looks like reducing the workers so that you can have higher productivity. Basically meaning every worker now has to slowly start doing the work of 2 people and then 3 people and then 4 people. And what does that lead to? It leads to burnout, right? It leads to people feeling horrible, to not having lives, to not liking the company they work for, which then leads to really high turnover. It also often looks like them making the decision to let go, even though it's illegal, and they find ways around it to say that's not it. But it looks like letting go of the older workers who cost more money because they have more experience. They know what they're doing, right? At the expense of a bunch of younger workers who don't really know what they're doing. And I think younger workers are also important, but we shouldn't be saying we're going to get rid of them at the expense of the wisdom that comes with folks who've been there longer. So I watched just quarter after quarter of layoffs, going from a few years where there was none of that, and it was a company that cared deeply about its people. And it just, that was a profound experience for me in realizing that companies can show up in two different ways, right? And still have great outcomes. It wasn't like the company wasn't profitable. It had been profitable for 100 years as a privately owned company. Or it can decide to go the route of growth at all costs. And unfortunately, it's not just publicly held companies that do that. I see it in the private sector as well, of companies that think that model is the model they need to follow, of growth at all costs. And that even happens in solopreneur businesses where it's only one person running the business. And they're following this model and burning themselves out. And so often they've left corporate America because they didn't like the model. It didn't feel good. They're like, I don't want this. And yet they go and recreate it for themselves and create a business where they are working all hours of the day, burning themselves out, and they end up resenting and hating the business. It doesn't have to look like that. We can run businesses that enrich our lives instead of us becoming like the our business is making every decision for us, right? We need to center ourselves in the business. When we center humans in businesses, they are businesses that can be profitable, they can be sustainable, and they remember that we're humans and that humans matter in this world, you know, and in this AI world, that's more important than ever.
Exactly. And my background is in government, and it works a lot like how corporate America does, where, you're more focused on getting, those services out rather than the actual people that are working there. And while I was, holding that position at the time, there was a lot of professionals that was quitting due to burnout. And it was still, constantly piling and piling and piling. So a lot of people had to pick up that slack. And sure enough, they burned out as well. And a few people actually ended up committing suicide because of it.
Mm.
And so, and I was a person too that experienced that burnout as well, because I had to carry another person's job while still carrying my job as well. But that's another thing that a lot of businesses, a lot of government agencies don't think about, is how much stress you're putting on your employees when you're out here trying to perform and get to those numbers to make sure that you look successful on paper, but how successful are you within the business? And that really depends on how strong your employee base is. And that retention is something that a lot of people don't like to talk about either, is how many of those people, especially as you spoke about, those older and more established employees are staying. And I kid you not, those were the ones that were walking away, the older ones. And so that's a great point to bring up when it comes down to human focused businesses, because you're starting to see that shift a lot now, especially with AI. And I think you were ahead of the game when you created this model, because you now see a lot of people getting laid off just because of AI, and leaving them pretty much stranded and, easily replaceable by a computer. And so I just don't agree with a lot of that, because you need humans, and you need to approach it from a human first perspective, because the reality of it is, even the CEO can have a bad day, and that CEO needs to remember, hey, maybe my employees are going through things. So when you're out here and you're putting that pressure on people, you have to remember, if it was you.
Yeah. And just because something can be done by a computer doesn't mean it should be, right? These are a lot of business poses a lot of ethical questions that we need to consider.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I use AI, but it's just certain things that I don't believe that AI should be used for, such as, for my assistants out there that are easily now being replaced by AI, because AI can write minutes and things like that. I still think that a human in that position, because sometimes AI can mess up, y'all. It can literally print out things and give you wrong citations and things like that, especially if you're like a student. You already know this, especially when it comes down to writing your papers. It can give you very fraudulent information. So that's one of the places where I have seen AI just completely not be useful. And I
Yeah.
hope a lot of businesses are out here doing their research if they're planning to incorporate AI, instead of putting the actual person in that position to monitor it.
Yeah. It can hallucinate, so we have to be careful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, how has your understanding of feminism informed the way you approach business coaching and leadership development?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I was a quote unquote good white feminist. I thought I was a feminist. I didn't fully understand because I grew up in a very white world where my understanding of feminism was largely informed by Gloria Steinem and Ms. Magazine and, a lot of white leaders in that space that I held up as sheroes, heroes, and really admired. And not to take away from their work because I think they were amazing, but honestly, it wasn't until about 2014 when I know the exact date. It was in August of 2014 because I lived in Ferguson, Missouri, um, half a mile from where Michael Brown was murdered by the police. And I remember it so vividly because I could see the fires burning down the street. And I remember thinking how I was really upset. I was angry about what happened, but I didn't feel compelled to be out on the streets, right? I didn't feel that level of activation about it. And that made me question why didn't I feel that? Like, this is happening outside of my door. What is this? And I had to sit with a lot of that to realize that my feminism for most of my life had really extended only as far as being a woman, right? And not understanding that feminism isn't about getting white women free. It shouldn't be about getting white women free. It should be about saying that all women should be treated equally, and not just all women. I honestly believe feminism isn't just about saying all women deserve to be treated the same. It's that we need to honor the full humanity of all people, right? And say that all humans are equally worthy and valid in the eyes of God or whatever it is you believe in, right? That we are all equally deserving of care and love and freedom and opportunity. And that moment with Michael Brown and realizing the reason I see so many other women who are not white, right? These women who didn't look like me, who are out on the street fighting and I didn't feel that same compulsion was because I had so much privilege just because I was white. And like, I think I might have intellectually sort of understood that, but it didn't really, I guess, come to my doorstep until it literally sort of came to my doorstep and I had to reckon with it. And that really changed everything. That's when I started to read Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Angela Y. Davis and like started to really understand that feminism needs to be intersectional for it to really be feminism, right? That my freedom isn't valid until your freedom also happens. Like, my freedom is tied to your freedom. If I really truly care about women, then it's not just about caring about women who look like me. So that shifted everything for me because for the longest time, I gave myself lots of excuses for, being able to sort of validate how I showed up in the world. And all of that finally got stripped from me. And now it's like, no, I don't get to excuse myself. I don't get to be defensive when I do something wrong. I can't pretend like these things didn't happen. I can't also pretend to know what it means to be a Black woman running a business or wanting to start a business. Like, those are very different experiences. And, up until that point, I had been as much a part of the problem as so many other white women who will say, like, well, it worked for me, so it should work for you, right? Here's my 3-step business solution. And if it doesn't work for you, well, then it's probably because you don't believe hard enough, right? It's your mindset that's the problem and not the fact that I'm a white woman who had all this privilege and advantage that allowed these 3 steps to work for me that maybe you don't have, and that's why it doesn't work for you, right? Before that, I would be able to just sort of say, well, if this doesn't work for somebody, then it's their mindset. It couldn't possibly be a failure of my understanding. So that has really shifted everything because now my work is really about how do I honor the lived reality of all of my clients. And I've worked with trans clients, I've worked with Black women, I've worked with disabled folks, people who have very different lived experiences than I have. And my work now looks like, let's operate first at where are the systemic issues that are causing your reality to look a certain way. Then we can start to talk about, okay, knowing that, and inside of that, what are the places where you have agency? What are the levers that are within your control? And we can find those and figure out how do we pull on those different levers, but never doing that in a way that is pretending as if you don't exist inside of a system that is rigged against you, right? And it's rigged against me as a woman, but it's not rigged against me in the same way as it is you, a Black woman, or somebody who's disabled or anything else. So it has radically shifted everything about the way I live my life, but also the way I operate my business and the way I coach.
Wow. And thank you for opening up and sharing with the audience, because that is a big thing when it comes down to feminism. We think that we have to all be against each other because of our races, when in reality it's literally not about races. It's not about titles. It's not about, you looking different than I. It's literally about everybody coming together and fighting for everybody's rights. And that is a beautiful way to explain it to my audience, because I think for a lot of people, those, police brutality issues is what really opened a lot of people's mind to the injustices of this current generation. And a lot of people have shifted. A lot of people are out there literally using their voice and allegedly that white privilege to change things on behalf of my community, the LGBTQIA community, on the disabled community. And so I truly appreciate you for being so open in that conversation, because again, these are the conversations that need to be had in order for us to grow as an entire society. So thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of people would have shied away from it, Ms. Mollenkamp. I'm going to be honest with you.
Oh, I know, and I would have been that person not all that long ago, right? A decade or more ago. I think I would have been that person. So, and I share that because I think for folks who do have privilege, whether it's you're white or if you're able-bodied, or if you are straight or straight presenting relationships, whatever the privilege you hold, I think it's important for us to notice, to be aware of that. And instead of to feel defensive because you have these other identities that are not privileged, I'm a woman and women are marginalized, right? So that I can honor that while also saying, and I'm white. And that brings with it a whole lot of advantages, right? Those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can both be true. And I like to share it because I think all of us should examine what identities do we hold that do bring us advantages, right? If you're able-bodied and you're Black, you have both an advantaged identity and a disadvantaged identity, right? And that can both be true. And it doesn't take away from the other to say, to notice and admit and examine the part of the privilege. And I think it's important for all of us to do that, because it's not until we do that I think we can really show up for each other in a way that allows us to really be true warriors for each other, instead of it still being more about, I got to get mine, right? Because that's what capitalism wants us to do. It wants us to be very concerned with how do I get mine, instead of how do I make sure we all get ours, right? And that's the difference.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to drop the mic on that one,
Oh,
because
thanks.
she just said that perfectly, because I'm telling you, with society and looking at society right now, it's disheartening to see exactly what's becoming of this country. And you have to just keep fighting. You have to keep standing up. And for me, being a light-skinned Black woman, a lot of people say you have an advantage over darker skinned Black people. And that's one of the things that I always kept in the back of my mind was, hey, I'm not going to be that person in the room that's just literally walking in like how America trains you and be all about myself. It's literally about opening doors and helping others get through those same doors and breaking down those walls for others as well. So again, I'm right there with you on that, Ms. Mollenkamp, because I've been through it as well, being that light-skinned Black woman. A lot of people have asked me, are you mixed and things like that, but I've literally taken every door I've been able to go through, and I brought people with me. So that's literally what it's about, y'all.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And let's get into talking about your book. It's entitled Liberate Your Business, which focuses on decolonizing entrepreneurship. Can you explain what that means in practical terms for someone running a service-based business?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I was talking about, being in corporate America and how we repeat so much of that inside of our own businesses, a business that still is sort of colonized is operating inside of the colonizer's mindset, which is about extraction. It is, how do I take? I want to take as much as I can, right? We know what that colonizer looks like. They come over and they steal, right? Like, how do I just take everything I can for me? And we think like, well, that's not me. But if we start to examine how we show up inside our businesses, often that mindset, and it's not, I always want to start with like, it's no one's fault. This doesn't make you bad or wrong. We all exist inside of a system where this is what we learned from school. School teaches us this. Like from our earliest days, the schools in America were built to reinforce all of the same mindset, right? To teach us how to be quote unquote good citizens, meaning teaching us how to be good colonizers, right? It's, and every part of our systems are designed to teach this to us. So of course we show up this way until we unlearn it. So it's not a bad thing that you're this way. It just means that there's room and opportunity for some learning. And what does it look like? It looks like, how do I take as much out of myself? So if you're a solopreneur, it's like, how do I extract as much from myself as I can to be quote unquote successful, which really usually means to make as much money as I can. That's how we define success in America. And I think that's a short-sighted definition of success, but it's often one that we adopt. And so it looks like, how many hours can I possibly work? How much, like, how little sleep can I get by with, right? How much do I really need to see my family versus like, how much can I work? But it also can look like, how little can I pay somebody else to do this thing that I need done? Like, somebody told me about somebody in the Philippines that'll work for 50 cents an hour or whatever the ridiculous things are. How do I get as much as I can for as little as I can, both from myself and then from others? And it also looks like that with customers. We see it all the time where people are like, how much can I possibly charge? It's like, how much, when we start to look at our customers as not as humans anymore, but as like someone that we can take from, right? That mindset, whether we are explicit about it or it's just sort of operating at a low hum inside of us, it's there in most of us. We're usually looking at other people as, how can I either get as much from them as I can, or how can I give them as little as I can, so that I can amass the biggest possible pie that I can, right? Without having to share any of it. That's sort of what that mindset looks like. So it looks like not sleeping. It looks like working too much. It looks like checking your email the first thing when you wake up in the morning. It looks like having to miss your kid's event because you made this obligation to go do this thing for work. It looks like overcharging and under delivering. It looks like thinking about, how can I, become that $10 million service provider, when it's like, do I need to be? It doesn't look like examining from every decision, making every decision start with, what is the most humane, the most human element here, right? Like, instead of asking like, how much can I get? It's more like, what can the person I want to help, what can they afford? Right? That's a different question than like, how much could I possibly get them to pay? Because when we look at it like that, then that's where you start to see people saying like, well, you could get a credit card you could take out a loan to do this, whatever. Not thinking about, is that actually what's best for that person, right? So it's really thinking about what's best for the person I'm trying to serve. What's best for me? How much time do I want to spend with my family? How much time do I want to be working? What do I want my morning to look like? Do I want it to look like I immediately get onto my phone, or do I want it to look like I have a nice slow wake up? Like this morning in the summers, I give myself full permission to sleep until 9 o'clock if I want. Actually, I don't even set an alarm unless I absolutely have to. I'm just like, I sleep until my body says I'm ready to get up. And then I get up and I see how my kid is doing. He's old enough. Yours isn't quite there yet, but mine's old enough now to be able to kind of get himself up and working and going in the morning. I go and I check on him. And then eventually I get to like, okay, let me log into my computer and see what I've got going on today. What do I need to do? That's a different way of wiring ourselves. So it's really just like, decolonizing means, can I make my business about the human in the business? Humans. I'm part of the business, but even if you're a business of one, a service provider of one, you still have a family, and that they're part of your business too. They should be part of your business decisions, right? Your clients should be part of your business decisions, not as people that you want to get as much from as you can, but as humans who also have their own realities going on and that you show care for, right? Your service providers, the community in which you live. Most of us don't even think about that, but that is should be a part of our business decisions. How much do I want to be able to give back to the community in which I live? How do I want to show up and care for those people, right? How do I want my business to interact within the community I live? It's a completely flipping of how we think about our business. And it's not to say, I don't want to make money. We all have to make money. That's the reality of living inside of capitalism. My mortgage company isn't going to take my love and care as a payment. I wish they would, but they don't. Okay? They need real money. So I got to make money. And that's a reality. And we always honor that, because part of honoring the human in the business is making sure that I, as the business owner, feel secure and safe. And that means that I have a roof over my head and that I can make sure my kid gets fed. So those needs have to be met. But it's when we start to look beyond that, where we start to define success as endless profits. To what end? What is the reason for all of that, right? And at what cost? And that's where I want people to slow down and ask themselves, are the values I'm bringing to those questions my values, or are they the colonizer kind of values that I've inherited? And we all get to decide for ourselves what that looks like. There's no right and wrong here. My book is not going to tell you what's right and wrong, because it depends on you. right? But it is going to encourage you to examine those things through that kind of a lens, and really challenging ourselves to ask, am I asking these questions based on my values or values that I was given that when I really examine them don't align with how I want to show up in the world?
You should turn that one into a speech that you go and give every single parent that you around this country, because that is so true. Like literally, we are taught from, I say, about first grade all the way through, if you attend college, how to be a colonizer. It's literally work, 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 work. Never think about your health. Never think about your family. Never think about anybody. It's literally take, 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 take. And next thing you know, you're burnt out. You find yourself empty on the inside, and it's due to a lot of the conditioning and systems that are in this country right now, and it's because that's just how it's been set up. But you have to get to a moment like me and Miss Mollenkamp have, and you're really saying to yourself, okay, what is the true purpose behind all this? If it's literally only to make money, then hey, I ain't knocking you, go make your money. But at the same time, if you are calling yourself purpose driven or a community builder, it should literally be about bringing more to your community, helping others, and things like that. But that's a great point to bring up, because a lot of people out here using that term purpose driven, when in reality you out here charging people $1,000 for some. A lot of people are overcharging you for the product sometimes and things like that, but that doesn't mean overcharge your customers because you're going through that. It just means, hey, you may need to highlight that, or you may need to switch things up. But I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who were originally started off successful and started off about community. And slowly, as they started to get bigger, they started thinking about those pockets and increasing those prices. And then next thing you know, the customers are leaving and you're blaming your customers. But in reality, you lost the purpose of why you originally started the business. So that's just something to think about, especially in this country, because everybody's trained pretty much from first grade all the way, if you attend college, to go out there and get the money. Even if you take a day off, you're considered lazy and things like that, when in reality, that should be in everybody's schedule. Some time to rest, some time to enjoy life, and then, of course, time to work. I really hope you turn it into a speech that you give everywhere you go, because that was well said.
Thank you. And Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, just recently made news in this last week when we're recording this to say that humans drink too much water and data centers are going to need all this water. And so we're going to have to really start to examine it. It wasn't that AI data centers drink too much water, it's that humans are drinking too much water, and that's going to be a problem for AI. And I bring that up only to say, I think often we think we are an exception and that we're heart-centered, even if, like, but I still got to make money. And I understand we have to make money. So this is not to say you don't, but it is honestly not that far a leap for your brain to get from, I got to make money, and I'd really like that pool, and I'd really like that Mercedes, and listen, more power to you to have those things. But if you're not stopping to ask yourself, why do I want these things? Is this something I need or something I've been told that I need, right? If we don't really question at the times when we don't even have a lot of money, if we don't start to really bring our value set in, then it's not that far of a leap before you're going to be that person saying, humans are really drinking too much water. It's really costing us water for our AI data centers. Like, it's in all of us. We've all been conditioned that way. And unless we get active, even when we don't have a lot of money, starting to really examine for ourselves, what are my values and how are those showing up in the ways that I think about money, success, work? If we don't do that, we will become that person and then wonder how, like, other people will be sitting there going, how did you become such a monster? And I'm not saying any of us are monsters, but that conditioning is there, and the leap isn't as big as we think it is to go from saying, well, I just want a little more, I just want a little more, I just want a little more, to get from that to suddenly thinking that humans need to drink less water so that we can protect our AI machines. That leap is smaller than we think it is. And so I just caution us, like, again, ultimately, the decisions you make are your own. But I agree with you. Don't call yourself heart-centered or, values-driven or all the things that we hear people saying, if that's not really how you show up.
And you're starting to see data centers go up everywhere. Like even in my state, Alabama, we got about 2 data centers that are going up, and people are referring back to the supply of water. And we all know that doctors have been telling us for decades pretty much to drink more water. So it's one of those things where now you're going against the healthcare field just because you want to make your pockets bigger. and you're taking away these jobs from people and their stability. And you're sitting up here still calling yourself, well, I still donate to cancer research. That's hypocritical, in my opinion. And I know a lot of people out there are going to say that's a hypocrite, and it is. It really is. And we have to really think about society like the animals. What are they going to drink? Where are they going to go? And, you know, in my state, you're starting to see all the wild animals such as panthers and deers and, you know, turtles and things like that literally start to be sitting at the red light with you. Like we've all seen those videos of where animals done broke out of zoos, and next thing you know, they send in somebody's backyard, and that's why, because you're literally coming into their territory, taking away their natural resources as well as human natural resources. And you have to really think about stuff like that when you're thinking about filling your pockets and saying that you're going to just donate to such and such organization, because after a while that such and such organization won't have a purpose, because you done literally built on top of what they was trying to prevent.
Well, and not to mention that I bet in Alabama, certainly here in Missouri and all red states, if not everywhere, where these data centers are popping up by design, it is environmental racism. They are almost always in areas that are predominantly Black and brown, because they come with them not just the water issues, they're also loud. If you've ever been near one, and most people haven't yet, so they don't know, they're very loud. It causes noise pollution along with a lot of other concerns, right? And so again, you know, like everything that happens, it's environmental racism. It's being put upon the Black and brown communities to bear the burden of these things that then are being used by the folks who are majority white, who are in the ownership class of businesses and whatnot, that are using the technology at the expense of other humans. And that is why I just think it's so important, again, for us to think about humanity at the heart of our business, because the decisions we make matter. They matter. And I think AI is showing us in ways that we haven't always fully understood. That the decisions I make as a small business owner, when I use AI, if I decide to use AI, I have to do that with the knowledge that it is coming at a cost, and the cost is being put upon Black and brown folks first. And it's going to, I mean, the water issue we see happening globally, who are the people who have the least access to water? It's Black and brown folks, right? And the same is going to happen as AI goes up. The cost is being bared by the community, who is typically, again, this is what extraction looks like. It looks like an ownership class that looks one way, predominantly white and predominantly male, making decisions that affect people who don't look like them, right? Who are predominantly Black and brown, largely women and children, right? That end up having to take the cost of these decisions that they make. And that's what extraction is. And it's what it looks like. And we may think we're exempt from it because we aren't that person at the top of that ladder making that decision. And to some degree, that's true, right? We are exempt in that we aren't making those decisions. And yet we all get to make decisions that can either reinforce the ways that they show up or that challenge those. And I'm here to say, let's try to make decisions that challenge it.
Absolutely. And that's well said. And, you know, there are a lot of misconceptions that a lot of entrepreneurs go through out here. And, you know, they get on TV or get on social media and they go, oh, well, that person is like me, so let me follow those things. So let's talk about scaling for a second. What are some of the most common misconceptions entrepreneurs have about scaling and growth that your work challenges?
Number one, who says you need to scale? Who says you need to grow? Toy Smith, who's this amazing decolonizing business expert, she's in my book. She was the first person that really pushed me on that and made me examine my thoughts in that way around it, because she was like, who made you believe that your business has to make more money than it did last year? Is that real? Is that true? Sometimes it is. We're living in a time of inflation, so yeah, my business might need to make more money to keep up with inflation, right? And that's real and that's valid. There are other times where we actually live in deflationary periods, or certainly periods where it's only very minimal amounts of inflation. And we may often, business owners start to set these goals of like, my business needs to grow by 10% or 20% or whatever it is, while inflation in its worst, like right now at its really worst in years is 4%, right? Typically you're talking more 1 to 2 cost of living kind of expenses year over year percentage. And yet rarely do you hear businesses say, yeah, our goal for next year is to increase by 1 or 2%, right? It's these big numbers. And again, it's not that it's right or wrong. It's to what end? Why? We need to examine always to what end and at what cost. If we're not asking those two big questions about the decisions we're making, then we're probably causing harm, whether we mean to or not, right? So if I'm not asking to what end am I growing my business by 10% when the cost of living, when all I actually need to make to, the only additional money I need to really keep up with my expenses is 1% or 2%. Why am I thinking, like, what is the goal for this additional 8% that I'm doing? And at what cost? Because even as solopreneurs, when we set 10 aims for for growth, what's the cost? It usually means as solopreneurs that I'm now having to work sometimes more than 10% more to get to that 10%, right? I'm having to charge X% more. At what cost to the people around me? And what does that do to them, to my clients? What am I asking of the people who may or may not work for me, right? What's the cost to my community when I can't show up and be involved, right? We're not asking why and at what cost. Then we're probably recreating harm. To me is the biggest thing is, do we even need to? I think we're not encouraged to examine that. We just take it for granted that, yeah, every year there's got to be growth. And every year that growth needs to look exponential, not just like the tortoise wins the race, not just like tiny cost of living kind of increases. No, I've got to be constantly striving for more and more and more. And I've got to scale, scale, scale. And what's the point of scaling? Growth is different, right? Growth is just how much more money can I make? Scaling typically looks like, how do I begin to make this business operate without me? And again, I ask, to what end and at what cost? There's nothing wrong inherently with saying, I want a business that can operate without my involvement, without having to be the one who's literally pulling all the levers. But I do need to think about, what is the reason for that? Is that because I want to be able to sell this business in the long term and that looks like my retirement fund? That's valid and fine. Is it because I want it to be a legacy business that lives beyond me because that feels important to me as part of my legacy? That's also valid, right? But we have to think about, what is the reason that I want this business to operate without me? And is it because I want to be able to enjoy my life? If it's that, like, I want to be able to, it's not really about selling it or it living on. It's just, I want to be able to like live my life and not have to put a lot of effort in. That's also potentially valid, but then we really need to examine at what cost, because now who are you making? Because the business doesn't just function on its own, right? And if it's AI that you start to implement, this is a new world we live in where people are starting to look at, how do I make AI run my business so I don't have to? We know there's costs there and we got to examine those, and you got to be able to sit with your value set and ask if those costs are okay. If it's about putting it onto other humans, at what cost? Am I extracting from other humans, asking myself, how little can I pay them so that I can make enough to do nothing? Does that align with my value set? Is that something I can live with? Is that okay for me? Right? These are the kinds of questions we need to ask. So I just think with scaling and growth, it's not that they're inherently bad. It's that most of it goes unexamined and is just considered how it is. And I think that's the biggest thing, that any place where we start to notice in our lives, well, it's just how it's supposed to be, or this is how it should be. That's a great place for us to really do some examination, because almost always that is stuff that we have inherited from a colonizer mindset, right? From that capitalist take mindset. And that is the stuff that we want to examine, because that mindset that needs to exist for us to all keep participating in this system that harms us. We are all participating in our own harm, right? And for us to keep doing that, we have to believe that it's just the way it is, right? We have to believe there's really no choice, that there is no other option. And that happens, again, it's why it starts when we're very young. We start to believe that, so that we don't ever question. Because when we start to question and we all start to look at each other and say, wait, is this working for you? Is this working for you? No. Wait a minute. You mean there's more of us than there are of those white men sitting in those ivory towers making these decisions? We can become dangerous, right? So that is why we got to start examining these and questioning for ourselves anywhere where we just are accepting something as the way it is. And growth, to me, unlimited growth, and scaling in many of its forms, those are places where we have just accepted that that's how you must run a business. And I say, is it? Is it? And at what cost?
Absolutely. And a lot of times it comes from watching somebody else answer the question and not really digging deep into self and asking self that question.
Exactly.
And that's literally where a lot of entrepreneurs go wrong. And, we brought up Jeff Bezos earlier and his whole, situation with Amazon and him talking about the water. And sure enough, If you ask somebody else gonna go, well, yeah, we need the data centers because they need to do this, so we don't need as much water and stuff like that. But is that really your thought process, knowing that you drinking 8 cups a day? So that's literally what you have to do. You have to literally ask yourself, what is it I'm doing? And if you're a purpose-driven person, it's literally to help your community in any way you can. Or if you're a legacy-leaving person, it's to leave something behind, so whomever can inherit that business and help it continue to grow. But again, when you're talking about growing and scaling, because I've seen a lot of people try to grow faster than what they literally identified with, and it's cost them in the end. So you definitely have to check in with yourself and ask yourself those important questions, because if you don't, I'm telling you, you're going to be out here sounding like a broken record, giving everybody else's opinion versus your own.
Yeah. And ask yourself, I think that a great question to ask ourselves around that water thing is, okay, then who gets no water? Who gets less water? I want somebody to ask Jeff Bezos that question. Which humans are getting less water than Jeff? Because his answer would probably be, he won't say this, but the reality of what we see and how he runs his business is the answer would be poor people and Black and brown people. Right? That's the answer. That's the reality. Now, if that doesn't sit well in your bones, if you're the kind of person for whom you're like, I don't like that answer, then you got to ask yourself, then who is it for you? Who is it for you? Who are you going to look in the face and say, well, you know what? I need my AI tool more than you need water. Sorry, you just don't get any water today. So who are you comfortable saying that to? And I think for most of us, the answer is there's no one that we're comfortable. I hope for most of us, we would say, I could not look somebody in the face and say, sorry, you don't get water anymore because my AI tool is more important to me. I need Claude more than I need you to have water, right? But those are the questions we really have to sit with ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a perfect example is the child that was just killed in South Carolina just because he went in the store and they thought he stole a bottle of water. So imagine people having less water, what's going to happen? People going to still need water because you still need to hydrate. Everybody know in the South and the Midwest during the summertime, the heat is one of those things of where everybody needs water because we all need hydration. And we could talk about the energy drinks. We could talk about the caffeinated drinks.
But they're made with water too.
Exactly. Pretty much everything that you eat and drink is made with water.
Yeah. So you want to clean your vegetables, you got to have water. We cannot as humans live without water, right? Exactly. And so who gets the question isn't even who gets water. The question is who's going to die. We know that is the question. And what we're saying is whose lives are more valuable, whose lives are less valuable. And the actions tell us again and again that we know the people in the power positions, the people who are making these decisions, we know what their answer is. Their answer is that Black and brown lives are less valuable. Yep. Those are the lives that we are willing to expend to have what we want. And I know that seems like, oh, well, that doesn't, I'm just a solopreneur running I'm a coach who's selling services, whatever. That doesn't have anything to do with this. This is awfully big stuff for me. Mm-hmm. And I get that. And yet the decision that you make every morning to say, I'm going to get up this morning and I'm going to go straight to my phone and start checking my emails instead of like resting, instead of like giving myself a little time to read a book or whatever, go for a walk in nature. That decision is actually part and parcel of these other decisions. It is in supportive. It is a way of casting a very small vote that says, I continue to support the system that says that Black and brown lives matter less, or they in fact don't matter, right? But it is exactly the same mentality. That is what has got us to this place, right? It is an ownership class that has taught us that our money matters more than human lives. And every time that we do anything in our day that reinforces that, where I choose to start my day by looking at business decisions versus me as a human, that is another way that I am casting a vote to say, yep, I like the system. Let's keep it going. And that's why I'm just saying, like, we get to make little decisions. And to the opposite of that, when you wake up one morning and say, you know what? I'm not even going to look at my phone this morning. I'm going to give myself 30 minutes to just luxuriate because I deserve it, especially if you're a Black woman. Most importantly, if you're a Black woman, when you choose to luxuriate, to rest, when you choose to do something that's just for you, that is your way of saying, I reject the system that says I am less worthy. I reject it, right? And I think that even if you are somebody who holds more privileged identities, if you claim to care, right, you claim to be a person who cares. Remember, I remember being that good white liberal who claimed to care, and yet my decisions, if you looked at my day-to-day life, my decisions didn't reflect that care. Now my decisions reflect that care by saying, I also am going to reject this system, not because it maybe harms me directly, but because it harms people that I say I care about. So if I say I care, then I got to reject the system too. I'm sorry to go on such a rant, but I really feel passionate about this.
No, you're absolutely fine. And I love that you're actually engaging in this conversation, because that is literally the truth. And if you know anything about systematic racism, that's exactly what she's talking about. It's not literally just saying, oh, you go to this store and I go to that store. It's literally rooted in the system.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to identify what it is, so you don't be the one that engages in it and goes, well, everybody else was doing it. Yeah, but it literally is rooted in the system. And so that's literally where a lot of Black and brown communities come from nowadays, when we're exposing the system and talking about the system, because that's literally where it is. It does not look like how it looked back in the 60s,
Yeah.
50s, and things like that. It's literally, you know, oh, I'm just going to build this nice data center on top of your community. And yeah, I may give a couple of y'all some jobs in it just to make it seem like it's okay. And sure enough, it's literally taking away your clean water. And we can literally talk about all the communities across this country. We can go back to Michigan and their whole
They talk to Flint.
There you go. And, you know, even here in Alabama, we've had situations of where the water just literally was completely contaminated with all types of things. Like, I remember a time where the sewage water was coming through people's, you know, regular pipelines, and people was drinking dirty water. So that stuff is literally rooted in the system. Somebody makes a decision, and normally it's a white man that's making that decision to infiltrate or contaminate, rather, people's systems. And basically it's literally to hurt and eventually kill people, especially Black and brown communities. So can you talk about a breakthrough moment with the client where embracing a human first approach transformed their business outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I always think of one particular client because I've been working with her for so long, and she runs a very quote unquote successful multi-million dollar kind of company that has a very large team and a lot of people. And I'll just even go back to the beginning of our work together. And there's been so many moments of big change to where it's continuing to put the people at the heart of this business inside, you know, and she works in financial services, which is not a system or an area of business known to care about people, right? And so she's trying very hard to change the reality of that inside of her company and inside of a system that is deeply broken. But it goes all the way back. God, it's probably been 8 years ago now when we first started to work together. And she didn't want to call herself a CEO. And I think it came out of a lot of corporate trauma that many of us have experienced. Because when you are a woman, and she's a white woman, and when you are anyone who's not a white man, very few of us have an experience of working for a CEO who looks like us, right? Most of the time, those are white men. Most CEOs are white men. If you just look at the numbers, this isn't me just, you know, spouting off. It's backed by the numbers. By a large margin, white men. A growing number of white women who unfortunately get there by repeating and replicating what they see white men doing, right? So even when it's a woman, often because it's a white woman, she's using that proximity to power through whiteness to replicate all the same harm. So most of us don't see a model of a CEO that is human-centric, that shows us what it looks like to care and to put people first. We don't see one who shares our lived experience. Very rarely do we see that, who understands what it means to, you know, exist in the real world and struggle to pay bills and have a family or whatever. And so because of that, her experience was having a white man as a CEO whose decisions did not reflect her value set, who didn't feel at all aligned with how she wanted to show up. And so she was like, I don't want that title. She rejected that title. I don't want that. I don't want to be that person. And I understood that feeling of like, I don't want to be that person. And yet what it ended up looking like was, because she wasn't willing to step into that role, to own that she was a CEO. And with that comes the title of, it's not just about being a CEO, it's about being the visionary. It's about being a leader. It's about being a steward. It's about, you know, care of company, responsibility. Because she wasn't willing to take on that title, she was constantly downgrading and dismissing and diminishing herself in her own eyes, as well as the eyes of others, right? When she wants to show up and say, well, I'm a business owner. when she's running a multi-million dollar company, right? Now, I think you can be a CEO of a business that's of one and making 30,000. You're still the CEO. Okay. So like, I don't mean to diminish your CEO-ness either. If you are the visionary of your company, you're a CEO. Okay. If you're the person who's making all the decisions, you are the CEO. But in her case, she's trying to operate inside of a system that very much respects title, right? And that has a lot of historic legacy around whiteness and maleness being prioritized and respected. And she's showing up, diminishing herself by giving herself a lesser title, right? And then also because of that, not trusting in herself and in her own decisions. When we finally did a lot of this work for her to first deal with some of that corporate trauma, and that is trauma that many of us experience inside of the corporate world because we are treated horribly. We are traumatized in those systems. So working through some of that, and then also some of the internal belief and confidence that she can, and not only can, but needed to own that title. When she finally got to a place of being able to step into and own that and show up in the room saying she was the CEO, showing up in spaces talking like a CEO who's holding a vision for her company in the future and leadership and what that looks like, it really did begin to change everything. And she's made so many other decisions that I could show that were more about the other people, but often, especially when you have a privileged identity, but for a lot of us, it's about that piece that is within our control. And again, we do that inside of the bigger system. So for her, as a woman, the system was one that made her believe she really couldn't be a CEO. Right? Or that she needed to kind of question her own judgment, right? We live in a system that makes women believe that we're not even allowed to trust our own bodies, let alone our decision making, right? So she's existing inside of that system, and we have to examine and say, that is real. That is real that's happening. Then we can look at what is the internal levers. What do you have control over? She does have control over whether she gets to call herself CEO. She gets control over whether she can believe she's a CEO. She doesn't get to control whether the men in the room are going to treat her with that respect or that they're going to call her that or anything, right? We can honor that is also real, but she gets to show up differently. And what she quickly discovered is when she made that decision and owned it, it changed how she felt about herself. And when you change how you feel about yourself, other people often have to start to change their beliefs about you as well, right? Even if the system doesn't change, which it hasn't, right? So that is a moment of like what that coaching can look like, where we honor the reality of the system, but also then look at what's within your control and noticing the change that something even subtle, seemingly small, like a title change, the difference that can make in how you are perceived by others but more importantly, even by yourself.
Absolutely. And in the mental health field, they talk about healing. And that's a very important thing, especially when it goes into entrepreneurship, because a lot of times when you go into entrepreneurship, it's due to, wanting to help, or either you've been through something and you see a problem there and you're trying to be the solution. And sure enough, if you haven't healed those wounds, you can easily walk into that journey and either become the person that you don't like, or be so fearful of becoming that person that you yourself back. So that was a great example of explaining how important it is to reevaluate self. How does self want to be viewed? How does self want to be presented to others? How does you can even look at it as, how do I want others to treat me? And it literally starts with yourself. And you really do, because I've seen a lot of people do that as well, of where you're so fearful of becoming that person that you literally shy away from the title that you're meant to hold and the position you're meant to stand in, and it can easily determine the success or the failure of your business. So you have to be mindful out here, y'all.
And I think this is a great exercise for all of us to do, to ask ourselves, how do I want others to treat me? Or how do I want others to see me? And then ask yourself, am I treating myself that way? Do I see myself that way? Because if the answer is no to that part, you may not be able to control them, but you surely control how you think and see yourself, right? How you treat yourself.
Let's talk strategies, because you help entrepreneurs with this as well. What strategies do you recommend for entrepreneurs who want to integrate social and collective impact into the core of their business?
I think every decision needs to include that then, right? So as we think about everything, because your hiring is a part of that. When you ask yourself, what does my hiring process look like? Where am I posting jobs? What language am I using? Am I using AI tools that I know have inherent biases baked into them? They do, if you don't know. Look up Algorithms of Oppression. It's a fantastic book that explores a lot of this, how all of these biases are baked into the tools we use. So am I using tools with inherent biases baked in to help me make choices around who I'm hiring? Am I allowing a name to my implicit biases to sort of show up because of a name I see versus looking through what a person actually brings to the table? Is there any blind part of my process to make sure that I'm not allowing biases to show up? When I think about how I'm paying people, is there a difference in what I'm paying people based on anything? Can I examine my pay rates to look for equity, not even just equality, but to examine equity? Because if we claim equity as a value, equity doesn't mean everyone's being paid the same. It makes sure that we're examining, are there people for whom additional money makes sense, right? Because maybe they live in a more expensive part of town. Maybe they had to pay out of pocket for degrees that someone else didn't because they had some, family help with that. There are ways to examine. Okay, hiring, pay, what am I charging? Does that line up with my value set? Like in my business, I do everywhere that I can when I'm not trading my time for money. And even then, I still sometimes do this, but certainly anything that I do that's like a group program or a product, I do equitable pricing. I offer more than one bucket for pricing. And I tell people this bucket is for you if the highest bucket is usually for people for whom they have a college education. They either can make their mortgage payment with no problem, don't have a mortgage because they've inherited a home. Maybe they don't have college student loan debt. We're not solely responsible for their student loans, right? And then there's buckets going down where people can self-identify. There's no application process because that takes away people's agency. It's just you look and you get honest with yourself. It also helps people start to examine privilege and understand some of those issues to say like, oh, that's right. That is kind of me, or this is me, and letting people price themselves in appropriately. Thinking about the tools that we use, right? Am I thinking about what are the costs of these tools? And I don't mean to me, but to the environment, to other people. Does making this decision take jobs from someone else that I claim to care about? Does using this tool harm somebody I claim to care about? Is there another tool that's run by somebody who has an identity that is historically marginalized, right? So if all things being equal, if there's two tools, could I choose the one that's run by a Black woman? Right? If the pricing's basically the same and everything else. Across the board, we can look at every decision that we make in our business and put it through this lens of harm and harm reduction, right? Where am I causing harm? Where can I reduce harm? Or even more through a lens of equity. Where can I use this decision to make a decision that is more equitable? And truly, like when we start to think about things in this way, there's no part of your business where you can't make that decision. You mentioned I have a podcast. I have several, but one is with my friend Taina Brown. It's called Messy Liberation. And we talk about just everything through an intersectional feminist lens, pop culture, politics, business. And we're doing a series this summer called Everything is Political. Because when you start to really understand these issues, every decision you make, from the clothes that you put on to how you spend your time to the computer you buy, to like literally everything is a political decision. Most especially when your identity is a political act. As a woman, me existing is a political act. As a queer woman, even more. You as a Black woman, your identity is inherently just being is a political act, right? So every decision you make, therefore, in your business or any part of your life is also political, but also because every decision has ramifications beyond just the decision, right? We talked about trash and how trash is political. We talked about therapy, how therapy is political. All of it is. So all of that is just to say, there's no part of your business, there's no choice you make throughout the day where there isn't an opportunity for you to ask yourself, is there a different choice I could make here that better aligns with my value set? One that would reduce harm, right? One that would cause less harm, or one that might actually create more equity in the world. And we can do that with every decision. It doesn't mean that every decision we get to do the thing that is. There's going to be times where you could say, there is a better decision I can make. But today, in this moment, that decision doesn't work for whatever reason. That's also okay. So a lot of this is some self-forgiveness work, because when you get too far down the rabbit hole of these things, you can go to the other extreme of causing harm against yourself, where you might say, well, I could charge even less for this program. You do have to go back to, you also have to pay your bills. Your safety, your care matters too. So that has to be first, right? You and your family and your care and safety and all of that. But then asking yourself these decisions. And honestly, it's literally every decision.
Everybody needs access to mental health services.
Yes.
Then people out here consistently raising their prices, or making it so unaffordable that people can't afford it, even with a copay. And even while I was working for the government at the time, and seeing how my copay went from $13 to $35, that was insane to me, because everybody deserves to have access to it. And as a business owner, like Ms. Mollenkamp said, think about stuff like that. You really do. Like, you have to think about everybody in the process, and you make those decisions yourself. And of course, if you go to therapy, they'll tell you to focus on self first, because self has to be sufficient in order to literally give out to the community. And I'm not knocking your prices and stuff like that, but at the same time, make sure that's a valid decision that you're making, because you can easily go from having a lot of people ready to sign up to nobody's able to afford it. And you have to be mindful, especially in this economy with everything being so high and the insurance premiums and all that type of stuff is going up. But that's just one of the areas that I have seen over the past couple of years of where people are starting to take advantage. And I just don't like that at all, because I feel like everybody should have access to mental health services. I feel like everybody should have access to water and things like that. So you have to be mindful of when you're doing stuff like that, because you can easily start to take away from the people that really benefited from your services.
Yeah. Yeah. Healthcare in America is deeply broken. And that is part and parcel for everything we're talking about. I just agree.
We know how it is, especially for women out there. Like, they're literally closing labor and delivery hospitals in my area, and all the smaller hospitals that are in the smaller cities, they're starting to close. So healthcare is just really broken right now. But I really want these insurance providers and politicians to realize, hey, what if that was you? What if that was your mom? What if that was your dad or your kids or things like that? Before you literally go out there and make a decision about your pockets, make sure that you're understanding and looking at the entire household and the entire, people that you serve in the process, because you can easily go from elected to sitting at home with everybody else trying to figure it out.
Well, it's just it, John Day. They aren't thinking about that because they don't think it's them, right? And they know it's not them. And that is why, I mean, look at maternal health rates and maternal death rates, and it's clear who's dying and who's not during childbirth, right? Black women are dying at exponentially higher numbers than white women during childbirth, and that's by design. And I'm only saying this again because just to reinforce and bring home this point where we start to allow ourselves to even subconsciously begin to other people, so that we can justify our own decisions around pricing or whatever the thing is we're doing. We are, even though we are not the Jeff Bezoses of the world, we are supporting it when we do that, right? And we just have to be really careful.
So let's talk about the podcast, because you did bring that up. What originally made you create both platforms? And
I've been podcasting for almost a decade now. So for a long time, it was actually called Light Bulb Moments, where I talked to business owners about the moments that made them sort of those big moments in your life where you're like, oh, I need a change path or whatever. But eventually that became Feminist Founders, where I talk to business owners who are trying to challenge these systems. And that has evolved a lot over time, as my own understanding has. And actually now I have a partner in that endeavor as well, her name's Faith Clark. She's a Black immigrant queer woman who's amazing and challenges my thinking all the time. And we do that together. And it's now kind of just as we are inspired basis at the moment. And then I do Messy Liberation with Taina because I love having conversations with her and I want an excuse. And now, this is one of the fun things about podcasting. We get together every week because we have to record a podcast, where in the past we might not have, right? But now we have this excuse and we're having conversations every week. And she's also a Black queer woman who is in the US, and she challenges my thinking all the time. And it's just the most lovely experience to be doing these podcasts with these women who are constantly helping me expand my own thinking. And then I just started a new podcast because I needed another, called Analog-ish. And so on that show, we're exploring what does it mean to be human in an AI world, right? It's not just business. There's some business stuff, but a lot of it is just more about like talking to people about the things they're doing that remind them that they're human. Hobbies and travel and endeavors with others and like community and just what are these things that we can hold on to right now, as I think so many of us are feeling more acutely than ever this like, oh my gosh, I am getting eaten up by the high tech world. And so that's been a lot of fun too.
Absolutely. Now, sadly, we've come to the end, and we always leave with a legacy here on About Her Business. And I give you a couple of seconds to think about this. When you think about legacy, what do you want to leave behind?
I don't really have to think about it only because I wrote a whole chapter about legacy in the book. It's the last chapter of my book because I am with you. I think legacy is so important. And when we talk about to what end and at what cost, legacy is a piece of that, right? What is the end? Well, for many of us, there is that piece of legacy. There's many things I could talk about business with legacy, but I'm going to talk about my kid because I am raising a white man. And that comes with a lot, in my mind, I hope for most of us who are doing that. It should come with a lot of responsibility. I even hope in his lifetime, I don't think it will change, but I would love to see that whole patriarchal white supremacist structure get dismantled. It probably won't in my lifetime or his, which means he's going to have a lot of responsibility. I can raise a man who can say, I'm here to uphold the systems that benefit me, or I can raise a white man who's here to say, I don't. And, I'm being incredibly intentional about that with him. And he is my greatest teacher too. He goes to a school that is predominantly or majority minority. So he is in the minority in his school and his friend group is beautifully diverse. And he teaches me all the time while I'm trying to teach him how to be a white man who understands privilege and who uses that privilege in ways to change the system. He challenges me too because he's 10 and he sees this world like, when people say the kids are okay, they're not lying. The kids are okay. We are who ruin them. They are beautifully, blissfully unaware until they're not, that they're not different. They all care deeply about the same sorts of things, whether it's family or Minecraft. They share values. They're more alike than they're not. And places where they're not, at their age, they see those things as gifts, right? Not as challenges or something bad. So I don't know, my legacy, I hope, is that there will be at least somebody in this next generation who is committed to challenging status quo. That's what legacy looks like to me. It's like leaving the world slightly better than you came into it.
Thank you for sharing. And I think that's a beautiful legacy to leave behind.
Thank you.
A lot more people need to follow behind you. Now, sadly, we've reached the end of today's episode. Before we go, we're going to make sure that we get all of Ms. Mollenkamp's information. Let us know where we can find the book. Let us know your socials. Let us know where we can find the podcast. Let us know all the details.
Yeah, go to BeckyMollenkamp.com, or I also own and have for a really long time smashingpatriarchy.com. Just go to BeckyMollenkamp.com.
Absolutely. And I will be leaving all that information down in the description box below. Any final words before we adjourn today's meeting?
No, this was lovely, and you're lovely, and thank you for having this conversation with me and letting me go on my tangents and rants.
Thank you so much for coming on and being so open and honest. I have truly enjoyed having you here today, Ms. Mollenkamp. And with that, ladies, today's meeting is now adjourned. Thanks again to feminist business coach, author, and podcaster, Ms. Becky Mollenkamp, for coming on and sharing her insights. And you be sure to subscribe to About Her Business wherever you receive your podcast so you never miss whenever we upload. Also, leave me some comments down in that comment section on which industry you think I should interview next. Until next time, keep your goals tight, your circle tighter, and that bank account growing.